In today's video, I'm going to talk about the returns of Mars. So Mars is the first of the 3 planets that revolve outside the Earth's orbit. Because of that, they're somewhat different than Mercury and Venus are, which revolve inside the Earth's orbit. So those 3 planets, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, because they revolve outside the Earth's orbit, they represent external things that come into the person's life that the person is going to respond to in a way, okay, and react to in a way in accordance with that planet. And when it comes to Saturn and Mars, the 2 cruel, malefic planets, their response and reaction is usually to some difficulty or trouble, and then they manage it through Mars or Saturn in a way that provides for a better life. Then Jupiter, his return tends to give more opportunities, and then the person responds to those opportunities. But with respect, with Mercury and Venus, the 2 Rajasic planets, a person gets the idea that, I'm going to do this. I've decided I want my life to go this way, and they figure out a game plan to make it go that way more. With the outer planets, again by outer I mean Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the ones that are outside the Earth's orbit, the person, things happen, and then the person responds to that thing. Saturn and Mars are Tamasic planets. They represent difficulties, hardships that we respond to and tackle and deal with somehow effectively. And because hardships are always a part of life, we're always going to deal with problems in our lives. When those retrograde and more important returns come, we usually make a stronger commitment to dealing with things in a certain way. And that, creates a long-term theme in a person's life. But it's always a response to dealing with things that are difficult when it comes to Mars and Saturn's returns. But it's important to get stronger in that discipline, in that hard work, because life is full of problems. And it's not like problems just come during that Saturn or Mars return. No. Mars and Saturn are going to create hardships and difficulties all the time. It's just when that return happens, it's a time of renewing how we deal with the problems that we're going to have in our lives. So that after we come up with a better way to deal with these problems, every time they come, we're going to deal with them. Okay? So, and then Jupiter, the 3rd of these planets, is a Sattvic planet. So he represents opportunities that make us feel, I'm so lucky that this is in my life, and we decide how we're going to run with it. But these 3 planets are not Rajasic. Okay, it's Mars or Mercury and Venus that are Rajasic. They give us the idea that we're the doer. With these external planets, there's an obvious force that we're dealing with, even a force that really makes us have a great opportunity, and we go, thank God Jupiter return has given me this. Or, Mars and Saturn come, and it's like, damn it, God, you're screwing with me. How am I going to deal with this? And you come up with a way to deal with it. But it makes you more aware that there's forces out there besides yourself. Whereas the decisions we usually make when Mercury and Venus returns are happening, these are, our decisions that we come up with our own, that we decide upon. Okay? So it's a more external return when you're dealing with Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The stimulus is external, and then we deal with it. With Mercury and Venus, the stimulus is an eternal need, an eternal want, an eternal desire, and then we figure out how to bring more of that into our life. Okay? So it's a little subtle difference between the 2 groups. Okay? Now specifically, Mars is a planet of discipline and strength of character. And the word they use to explain Mars is sattvam, which means strength of character. So discipline and strength of character are how we deal with difficulties. One of the ways, when difficulties come, strength of character can get us through. Discipline gets us through. So like when you got soldiers on the line, and the enemy comes charging at them and shooting at them, what holds it together is their discipline. Even in the face of that fire, in a disciplined way, they keep about doing what they need to do, rather than running, which is their emotional response that they want to do, turn around and run. And that's what a Mars return will sometimes bring. There'll be a difficulty. Their response will often want to be just to run, but that's not going to solve anything. And so during that Mars return, some disciplined action is what's necessary to improve things. The time for wishful thinking, oh, I wish if only, is gone. That's not going to happen. It's a time for some disciplined activity. Or it can be a self-discipline, which is what strength of character is. Strength of character is simply self-discipline of some sort that helps a person deal with the crisis at hand. Okay? So, returns of Mars bring events that stir one to discipline and ennoble strength of character. When Mars returns, the time is right for increasing discipline, exercise, living in noble ideas, and adopting activities and ideas that allow one to get through the difficulties of life more successfully and happily. Also, surgical procedure, surgery, often comes into a person's life during these times to alleviate difficulties that may have been there for a long time that they finally got fed up with, or perhaps that they found out about at that time. So it's another possibility because Mars also rules surgery. Okay? But the key thing is always about discipline and strength of character, doing something hard, overcoming some difficulty to make your life better. That's what the returns of Mars are about. Now, depending what house Mars relates to, there can be some differences that are going on. But again, that's the basic. Okay? Now, when it comes to the first house, Mars in the first, Mars ruling the first, Mars with First Lord, any of that kind of stuff, when there's a first house involvement, then you might find that developing physical strength becomes one of the disciplines that's adopted. Or surgery, something to do with physical Mars, is often a more significant thing. Okay? When it's the second, you will find things that perhaps dealing with mineral wealth can come into play. Mars in the second represents minerals. It can be a time of dealing with issues with one's eyes. Okay? So if somebody was going to do a natural program to increase their eyesight, for instance, that could happen during a Mars return related to the second. Okay? Third house Mars connections will usually have some discipline or strength of character with respect to siblings, competition, teammates, exercise for fun and competition, training, of course, which is part of exercise, those types of things. Okay? Fourth house Mars will oftentimes relate to events revolving around real estate or something with the mother. Okay, two of the key indications of the fourth. The fifth, being the third from the third, usually tends to bring up things like siblings, competition, teammates again, and exercise either for fun or perhaps for health, for improving one's health, because the sixth being the house of disease, the fifth is the 12th from there. So the fifth house gives us the ability to overcome disease. And so exercise to overcome disease can also be a fifth house Mars focus. Sixth house focus of Mars can deal with enemies, accidents, exercise for health, and things involving the military could put this pressure on. So a person might join the military when they have a Mars return relating to the sixth or something. Seventh is about focusing desires and having more, let's say, discipline in how one goes about pursuing their desires. Again, which is part of focusing and doing what's required to get the discipline or to get the desire fulfilled. It could be any type of desire. But a person might find they need to be more disciplined, be more focused, be more, have more strength of character, be a better, more solid person if they're going to get what they want if the Mars returns affecting the seventh. Okay? Eighth has to do with accidents, surgery, and battles. Are common things that involve with the eighth. So it could be a court case, a fight, something along those lines. Ninth has to do with strength of character and ideals. So it could be events that cause a person to really develop their character or to live to a certain set of ideals, things like that, to help them get through that difficulty. 10th house is command, leadership, taking control of the situation, becoming the general in the situation, things like that, becoming the person that knows how to fix the things, are often 10th house type indications. Okay? You remember Mars is the general, the commander-in-chief of the army, which is a 10th house role for Mars. 11th house can be a competitive house, competitive medals, things like that. Because 11th house is the house of titles and medals. It can also be a period of getting honors for your strength of character and your discipline, whether that's because of doing great in academics or anything. But it could be doing great at your work. It could be a period of getting honors due to your discipline. And also because it's the 6th from the 6th, accidents and health things, basically the 6th house indications that I talked about are also strong possibilities. 12th house can deal with secret enemies and also the effects that enemies have upon one. So a person can go through a period where, enemies, have a big effect in one's life. And a person might deal with that by adopting a greater strength of character or more discipline in how they manage parts of their life in order to deal with the problems presented by the enemies. Okay? But the key thing for Mars is always, it's about developing more discipline about something and more strength of character, living up to ideals, doing anything that requires discipline, anything that revolves around training, which is what Mars is all about. Okay? And also surgery is a big one. Now, as usual, Mars returns that take into account that retrograde across Mars 3 times are going to be the biggest returns, the most significant. So Mars comes and hits the planet, retrogrades, hits the planet again, and then goes direct and hits the planet a 3rd time. Those will be the most significant. And those will happen on an average of about 15 years. Okay? Now, sometimes Mars will hit a planet, retrograde, not hit it, and then continue. So you won't always see 3 hits. With Mercury, you always see 3 hits, it seems. Mercury always goes 1, 2, 3. But just the same way that Venus will not often go 1, 2, 3, maybe once in your life, Mars will, about half the time go 1, 2, 3, hit it 3 times. But other half of the time, Mars will just hit it, retrograde, but not far enough back to hit it, and continue onward. That's still going to be one of the significant periods. Or if Mars goes into a sign, retrogrades, then goes direct, and then hits it on the direct. So it only hits it once, but it retrograded in that sign. Pay attention to it. So the big ones are always the hits where Mars, before or after hitting, is going to be retrograde in that sign. And that's going to be a more significant return, and that'll happen about every 15 years. Now, the reason that's a significant return again is because that's when Mars is going to be as far as it's going to be from the Sun as it makes that hit. And that makes Mars a more powerful transit influence. A full planet is always a more powerful transit-giving influence. You're going to do bigger things when that full planet transit is there. Just like the full moon, when it's opposite the Sun, it's big and bright, can trigger things in your chart, while the other planets can trigger things in your chart anytime. But they're going to make the biggest things happen, the biggest changes, when they're opposite or close to opposite the Sun, which will happen when they go retrograde in that sign. Okay? And of course, when they hit 3 times, you get a much longer period of effect. So that's the most important time. But even if it doesn't hit 3, if it just hits it and then retrogrades while it's in that sign, it's going to be one of the important ones that you want to look towards. Okay? And that'll be about every 15 years. So